Okay. Sorry about sitting there for so long. Just waiting for people to come in. Hmm. Okay. Is there anybody in here? This is so annoying. Okay. Uh, Speak up. Go ahead and type in a reply if you're there. I have a hard time with this. There's a couple of things. There's a delay that I know about the delay. I somehow I can't get the the flow. And it, like here's the thing. Like YouTube, it seems like by the time somebody like when they first come into the room, it takes a minute, well not a full minute, but it takes some time for the YouTube to update and say, "Hey, you have a viewer." And often when I go to look at the viewer participants, I don't see anybody listed. I don't know if they're coming in and leaving, you know, that fast or it just doesn't catch up. And I don't know if I'm talking to a person or not. So I opened this up just to chat. So I like the back and forth. I don't like to sit on a bully pulpit or stand on a bully pulpit and yak. I like, it's late night. I tried to do a show earlier where I was, you know, talking. I had a co host that kind of didn't co host. And it's hard to rely on people these days. So I used to do these a lot. And people would kind of file in and have a little chat, and that was about it. But I can't seem to get people to talk. I always seem to have two people. Shit. See, that's what I'm saying. Now they're gone. Okay. Keep trying. Okay. See, Twitter, it says I got 9 people, but I read that Twitter will tell you have a view, not a viewer. It tells you how many views, and a view is somebody who stared at your screen for 4 seconds. That ain't a view. That's somebody scrolling by. So I don't know if there's anybody there or not. And now, what did this person just say? Okay, okay. You can't leave comments, but you can type in the live. Or maybe I don't have that set up. That would be obnoxious to find out after all this time. Um, hmm. Well, I'm gonna try it. Hi, Dopey. Okay, so yeah, you can leave. You can type in the comments at. Okay, so that's if you heard that, you heard that. Probably no one watching anyway. So as I'm fiddling around with this stuff, um, I saw a couple of things. I saw somebody talking about narratives and dungeons. Here's the thing. I brought this up before. I sure wish somebody was listening, or I knew that they were, without any 8 views. That's not viewers. That's views. Um, Damn it. Well, I don't know. She must have taken the right pills that night because she was supposed to help me tonight and she fucked me over. Ah. Okay, this is fucking annoying. Where's the... Nah, I don't want that. I want to stream. Okay. Oh, right there. Okay. Let's see if that works. I don't know. I'm not now yet, dopes. Okay. Anybody there? Oh, hey. Sorry, I was trying to make something work. Yeah, I just sometimes I like to chat. I just kind of an open chat type of thing. But I did see somebody talking about dungeons and narratives, and I just did a video about this. And here's the thing. Sorry about the nose. I got this allergy thing going on and a mustache thing. But anyway, uh, somebody said I don't need no stinking narratives when I plunder a dungeon. I am on Rumble. I'm trying to make that work. It's a little bit more. It's less smooth than some of these others, but I am on Rumble, and we will be getting that going. I have two channels on Rumble, and I'm thinking about deleting the other one because it's not gaming and it's harsh. But anyway, back to the dungeon thing. I've got no problem with dungeon crawls. I think they're fine. I think though that if you're going to have a dungeon inside of a world that you've created, that I don't know if narrative's the right term, but having a reason for it being there makes sense to me, as opposed to just here's a realm, and for some nondescript reason, there's a bunch of underground layers that you you raid. It just doesn't seem like it's a well fleshed out world to me if that's the case. You know, if you're a dungeon should have some sort of backstory. How did it become a dungeon? Was it always a dungeon? The actual description or definition of dungeon is basically a hole in the ground where you put prisoners. It's like solitary confinement in the Middle Ages. It was just a small room. Obviously, we're talking about something else. A large underground labyrinth. Okay, was it the basement of a large fortress, a castle, a temple? What was it? I think it's interesting to add those details and to use those details as a way of dropping hints or describing what's inside of it instead of, you know, I just don't see RPG like to me. If you're just doing a dungeon crawl, in of itself, that's fine. Like I said, but that's like you ever played the game? I forget the name of it now. There was a video game. God, I'm old. I forget these things, but there was a party of it was like a barbarian, a wizard, an elf, and a thief, or something like that, and you were running around. It was an arcade game, and you were just picking up boxes of gold, and there wasn't any other, point to it other than score high by grabbing a lot of gold. Gauntlet, that's right. Thank you. And there's nothing wrong with Gauntlet, but playing D&D as a dungeon crawl is just playing Gauntlet in slow motion, in my opinion. If you're, so you should have some sort of backstory to your dungeon inside a realm. Those little details are what make a world interesting, as opposed to being just some 2D place to go and bonk big monster over the head and steal its treasure. Should be more robust and substantial in its detail. It doesn't have to mean that you have to read a fantasy novel. I think it's one of these things where people go to two extremes. They say, "Well, I don't want to read your fan fiction." Fine, but if I wanted just to smash things, that's what I had the Atari for. When I wanted to play something that had some story behind it, I grabbed the hardcover AD&D books, So I don't think it's a matter of either or. I think it's a matter of context in the greater game that you're playing, as far as narrative goes. And I'm not sure that I'm much of a fan of the whole aversion to narrative. Again, I understand nobody wants to read a chapter's worth of novel before they start their adventure. But even if you're going to play one of these browser type, go do whatever you want, isn't some origin story? I don't know, maybe I have a quirk, but I have to know, what am I here for? How did I get here? Have I always lived here? What happened before? Why did I choose to go to this place? So I have a world where most people were born into it. It's very large. You were born in one particular section. And if you want to play that kind of open sandbox gaming, that's fine. But it isn't a two-dimensional world. There's stuff going on all the time. It has its plots and machinations between countries and political entities and stuff like that, and you can ignore them or you can get involved with them. They generate stories and plots. How do you like that map? That's part of it right there. So I just don't. It just seems like just materializing in some Hollywood backdrop type of world where everything's two-dimensional. In fact, I was just typing with on Twitter back and forth with Rob Kuntz, and he mentioned something about it in some article that he had posted. He says, "Here, I did this interview so many years ago or whatever," and he was talking about the dungeon and the based worlds where it was like playing the game Diablo. You had, the dungeon you kept going into, and the only time you went to the surface is to go get healed or to go get gear, and that was it. There was the tavern and the general store, and he said it was very pale and two dimensional. I'm glad you like that map. Yeah, that's my. It's gotten a lot of attention. So that's it. It's called McQuantica is the name of my realm, and it's kind of Greyhawkish in that. Um, right. That's what I think. It just seems to me like it's just okay if all you're doing is going to get gear and going to get a drink or two or listen to somebody for a second while you heal up and learn your spells and then go back down in the same dungeon. That's Diablo. It's a video game. Why am I doing that on paper? I could go play Diablo and finish a whole level in what 3 hours, whatever, less if I'm good, which I wasn't, but I want a little bit more to that. So I think there's a happy medium to that sort of thing. That you don't have to be married, to the idea. What I look at railroad is you're part of this plot, and there's no derivative path away from this plot. Like that's it. And I don't always find that fun either. But not having a plot at all doesn't seem like a viable alternative in my mind either. So McQuantica, like I said, it doesn't have any particular overarching plot. There's this country here and that country there, and they have their tensions and they have their disagreements or agreements and their personalities and cultures, and they're all different. And when you maneuver around this map and the rest of it, you'll see all these different cultures, and sometimes they butt heads over resources or something like that, and you can get involved with it, or you can just wander around looking for other types of adventures. There's plenty of dungeons and runes and stuff to explore, but they all have some backstory and place within the greater realm. They're not a story necessarily in and of themselves that you have to follow, but it helps as if you want to unlock their secrets or you want to find out what's really hidden inside of them. It may help to at least learn the basic history of what it was or what it is now in some cases. So I do that sort of stuff with my gaming. So that's what I saw. I saw a guy I used to game with, and he was putting it out. I don't need no stinking narrative. Well, I think that's always been my approach to it, and I like to discuss it with Kuntz because he's kind of the granddaddy there, or the last thereof. Having been responsible largely for Greyhawk and stuff like that. So it was neat to talk to him again. I've met him before. He doesn't remember because I don't think he's seen any of my lives yet. He probably won't remember it was so long ago. I looked vastly different. I was fairly young at the time. And I'm pretty sure it was him that was in. I've met him at Gen Con, but that's just hey, can you have my autograph type of thing. But I believe he was. There were several TSR people that I got to meet at my uncle's house, whom had them over for dinner and stuff like that, because he was a business associate of TSR during the heyday of it. So I got to meet some of these guys. So anyway, so it was neat to talk to him about that. So that was one thing I was talking about. Yeah, it was really neat. That's how I started it. I had heard the term Dungeons and Dragons, but I was playing with Mark's Toy Soldiers in the sandbox at that time, and I didn't really, I was more into the rifles and the tanks. But any game interested me. I was kind of have a voracious appetite for reading that sort of stuff. And I went down into the basement of my uncle's house. My dad and I had gone over on a Saturday. We usually go over on Saturday afternoon to visit. He only lived 3 or 4 miles away from us. So we'd go on Saturday afternoon and visit the family, the cousins and such. And they had me run downstairs to the basement where the refrigerator full of beer was. Hey, go get us a beer, Jason. Okay. So I went down, got a beer. And when I walked down there, I saw boxes and books laid out. And they were of a color they weren't old musty books like my grandmother had. They were very colorful and looked different. And I said, they just have a very gamey look to me. So I went over and I looked at them. Some of them were covered up with tarps and stuff on ping pong tables. And I opened them up, and the first thing I saw was Rogues Gallery. and I saw boxes of the miniatures with the lead miniatures, those sets you used to get. Wow, man, these are like war games, but kind of different, you know? And I go, oh, I've heard of Dungeons and Dragons. Somebody was talking about it. So I went up and I thought, I didn't know Tony was, my uncle's name was Tony. I said, I didn't know he was a gamer. I didn't think he played. I said, hey, Tony, you playing with that stuff? And he goes, playing with it? That's my brand new big account. He says, do you know about that stuff? And I says, well, I've heard of it, but I'd sure like to learn more. And he says, all right, well, I'll get you more of it. And ever since that conversation, he would come home with samples. He was in packaging. So he worked on some of the books, but a lot of the box sets and stuff like that. But he was able to get a sample of about everything for me. And he'd bring it home for my birthday and for Christmas. So I ended up having everything TSR made from him. And then he'd give me a ticket to go to Gen Con. It would be comped by the vice president of TSR. Or was a vice president of sales, whatever. And the guy's name was Mike Martin, and he always get me a comp ticket. I'd have to pay for the games, but I get a 4-day pass for free as a VIP through him. So I always got to go to Gen Con when I wanted to. It was awesome. So that's how I started with the D&D. So I started with the hardcovers after reading through Rogues Gallery and stuff like that. And I was like, how do I put all this together? I had to, kind of piece it together. And but I started playing 1E, and I played mostly by myself. That my babysitter was playing. I had a babysitter, and he lived in the neighborhood. As a young kid, he was my babysitter. He was my babysitter when we were playing D&D, but when I was a young kid, he was my babysitter. But anyway, and he lived right in the neighborhood. So I was, hey, how you doing, Ryan, and all that. And he ended up playing with me because he found out I had got the book, so I started playing with him and all that. So that's how I started. Yeah. And then I had some friends come over that had moved into the area from Florida in the 80s, and AD&D was too much for them. They said it's too complicated, it's too much to read. I don't want to do all that. So when we went out to the mall, we saw Beck Me for sale, so we bought that. And they would play Beck Me. They wouldn't play anything else but Beck Me, but they play that. So that was cool. So that's kind of how I started with that stuff. So, but having had the opportunity to meet a lot of these guys, I got to meet Gygax a couple of times. And when I say meet, I mean on the most strictly technical of terms. I didn't have beers or anything with these guys, but handshake, how you doing? Hey, can you sign something? I had one conversation with Gary once. That's it. But and that was at Gen Con. It was kind of quite an experience because he was in front of a bunch of people. But when I see all this stuff going on with WOTC and what they're doing, and I know Tracy from Milwaukee, Tracy Lesh, and I don't know him as a friend, but I know him because he was a kind of a local cult celebrity at the time back then. He hosted one of those horror movie type of things, like Elvira type of thing. Anyway, but it's very upsetting to see what they're saying about these people, because in my mind, by association, they're making these accusations towards us as people who played at that time. That's the way I see it. It's just like when the war game community came out and they said, well, we're letting everybody know that wargaming is for everybody. We're open to it. And, and they made this big hullabaloo about it. GMT and the gamers, or not the gamers, but MMP, Multiman Publishing, they both did it. And I said, by saying that, in turn, what you're inferring is that in the past, that wasn't the case. And by saying that, you're also saying that people like me were going to tell somebody to go take a hike because of their identity or something like that. And I found that very offensive and incorrect. So that's the thing with WOTC. I don't get too deep into that. And then there's the orc thing. It's just funny. So, if you look around on Twitter, I put out a an AI generated picture. I asked AI. I know some people really hate AI, but it's great for gags, and it's not really, I think, hurting anybody. But um, I asked AI. I says, make Pancho Villa an orc. So I put that out there because everybody was making that comment. So, and I was playing a war game earlier on live. It didn't go so well. I had a co-host that kind of up and walked off on me uh, just as we were going live. Some people, they don't have any manners. But I was going to demo my war game. I'd come up with a fantasy war game, and the intent of the system was to um, kind of be an homage to chainmail without being as convoluted and multi spread across all these different books as chainmail was. It was just going to be everything in one package, kind of old school 70s war game. And I had to make a comment about the orcs because uh, I used Tabletop Simulator for VTT. I wish more people would. I don't know what. There's a lot of people that seem very averted to it, and I'm not sure why. I do everything with that: wargaming, RPGs, everything, for several reasons. A, it's $20 and that's it. You don't have to put another dime into that puppy. So there's that. Um, it's three-dimensional, and you can animate the figures. I know. I think it's Forge or whatever you call it, where the figures are somewhat animated in it. Um, but you can import PDFs for free into Tabletop. You can import your own three-dimensional files if you make models yourself. You can import sound effects, and you can make visual effects in Unity and import them. And so I like that idea. It has, and when they say Tabletop Simulator, they're not kidding. Everything the same. In fact, when I was making the terrain for my fantasy game, they were let's see, they were probably about 2x8, kind of like the things you would buy in a hobby store. Those styrofoam pre-flecked green sections that you would put on a table, for your base of your terrain. And they were exactly the same in dimension and everything. They've been, yeah, you can play old Avalon Hill games on it. That's the one thing I don't understand why you would do that on tabletop, because tabletop it's not memory intensive anymore. When it was brand new, it was, but most things are. But I don't see why you would need 3 dimensions to play what essentially was a 2-dimensional game. It's kind of neat, but it's actually kind of stacking the chits become a little bit of a pain in a caboose when you play on Avalon Hill or on tabletop. The only thing that, and I'm almost hesitant to say it, but seeing I have such a small followership, hopefully it'll grow. But SPI, some of those games are owned by people like Joe Miranda, and they don't want them on Vassal. But Joe and these people don't know about tabletop. So you can get a lot more SPI titles on tabletop than you can on Vassal. But otherwise, I would tend to play like Avalon Hill stuff on Vassal because it's a little easier on the machinery. Though it does have its drawbacks. Yeah, sometimes it can be. Now, like for me, I'm a huge Panzerleader guy. I love Panzer Blitz, I love Panzerleader, and I love big scenarios. So that may be the only time I would say that tabletop has it over Vassal, because once you start getting into the kind of levels of complexity and scenario that I like to get into, it may be easier to go to tabletop, because shoving too many maps into the Panzer leader on Vassal tends to make it go a little, starts to choke on the information. But it's gotten better about that. You can play, like, I've seen guys play like Comp Group Piper and real big ASL campaign level scenarios on Vassal now, because they've done some change to the thing. I'm not very good with programming, so I'm not really sure what it is, but there was some fundamental redesign that made it more memory efficient. So I've seen them making some of those big ones. Like, why would you play that in ASL size big? Yeah, Vassal. That's the one. Yeah, Vassal. So, but I do, like somebody told me years ago, Featherstone said it in a book too, the Piers, or was it Grant or whatever, the Piers form of wargaming is miniatures on a table. And I agree with that. So that's the other thing about tabletop, is you can get the miniatures going, but you can't, like my board was 12 by 8 feet for miniatures, and it wasn't enough room. And you can maybe get that, maybe on tabletop, but after pushing past that, it's not really possible. And but if you play, on Vassal, you can get more territory, although it's condensed because of the hexes and stuff like that. Yeah, I had sawhorses. My dad was into carpentry, and he had a lot of plywood laying around that he didn't use. And he took one larger piece of plywood, and we used to have a really neat slot car set on it. And then my sister had homecoming party in the basement where the slot car set was, and her drunk ass high school friends, because you used to be able to drink beer when you were in high school, when you're 18. So all these guys, they drank a bunch of beer and broke it. So I took the plywood and I put that in, and I added to it. I got a couple of other pieces when you didn't have to pay out your rear for wood. I made a 12 by 8. So now I used to play on the floor, but my dad, when I was a kid, but my dad kept kicking the stuff around for not picking it up. So I got the boards. I was playing Harpoon one time. On my dad let me come back to the house after being in the Army and I had some time off, and he let me use the basement. So I played Harpoon in there because it was painted like a sky blue, so it kind of looked like water. So, but I used to do that with the old 180, the Rocco or Rocco, however you pronounce that, those old models. I used to play with them as a young kid down on the basement, and he'd get pissed and I'd kick them around. So, but yeah, I used to do that, and then I go into the sandbox, and use the Marx toy soldiers. But yeah, that's why I use tabletop. I like to use that system, and it's cheap and easy, and it works real well now. And for RPG stuff, it's great. There's people that make like effects. So like if you can hit a button on your model that'll make the model swing a sword or shield block, or stuff like that. And then they make effects like special effects, like what was it, a good example I saw? Like Firewall. That was a good one. You actually, if you cast Firewall, there's a little pog that you can put down on the table and tap it with your mouse, and it'll show flame, like a wall of flame, and it looks really good. And then you can, if you want to get really fancy and you've got enough memory, because now memory starts to be a thing if you get too involved, but if you got enough memory, you can put in like the crackling of fire along with it, so it's visual and auditory. And it's like, I remember a friend of mine, he was a a big computer gamer. We would play games for hours. And I said, "Hey, if you're into this stuff, what? Come play 40K with me." And he's, "No, no, I won't. I don't want to do any of that." So he says, "I'll play that stuff when the miniatures come alive or a holographic." And I thought, I'm going to call up Derek, because now on tabletop, they come alive. They walk and they hack and they slash and they can, they look great. So that's why I use that. So I've got this Campaign and Conquest is the name of the show that I tried to do with a female co-host, and that didn't work because she left. But hopefully I'll get somebody else, or I'll do it on my own. And then I've got this one, Command Post Gaming is the name of the company. I've made an RPG, and the RPG comes with mass battles. That's what I was demonstrating, or trying to demonstrate this earlier this evening. And wargaming, I think that's why you were coming. Wargaming, wasn't it? So I've got Armageddon's Edge, which is a post-World War II system that I use regular maps with. Here's a little thing I did. Another thing I used to do as a kid is, kid is relative, but I used to do in the 80s was I went to a map store. There was this really neat map store on the south side of Milwaukee. I lived in Milwaukee, and I bought Michelin road maps for all of Germany, all of West Germany. At that time, they didn't have much in the way of East Germany, anything, because it was the 80s and the Cold War was on, but they had West Germany and pretty nice ones. So what I would do is I would lay those out on this big 12 by 8 I would have. And then eventually I got like a place to pin them up on the wall. And they also had at the map store, they had these pins with what's that? I kind of recently got into it. Yeah. I stopped at. I actually told Tony, I says, stop bringing me second edition, because I'm never going to do anything but sell it. And he goes, I'll keep bringing it to you. He was a funny guy. He liked to turn a profit on used stuff. He goes, well, then sell it. Let's see how much money you can get for it. And then I told him how much, and he stopped giving it to me, because then he wanted to get. Then I don't mean to put him down. He loved to make deals, so he started bringing the stuff to flea markets and selling it himself. But he was a great guy too. In fact, here's how great Tony was. It was the greatest thing. So Tony died of stomach and liver cancer. Was not horrible. And it took about 2 years in total to get him. And second edition was bad enough. It was bad enough to me because it was sanitized comparative to 1E. And I peaked at 3.5 a little bit. And I thought D20 Modern was like the only one I thought I could do something with that, because it's modern and it doesn't matter. But as far as D&D, no. And that fourth edition, I didn't even know that was D&D. I said, oh, they stopped making RPGs. Now they're just selling shitty miniatures, plastic stuff. But I found out that was actually supposed to be D&D too. Yeah, it was, it's like playing 1E was it was looked at as being as a bad thing generally in society. And I know it sounds almost immoral to say that was a good thing, but at the age that we were, it was cool to kind of be there wasn't anything really wrong with that. Satanic panic stuff was going on, all that. So that was great. So, and it was a great escape, and it let you constructively explore things that were interesting to kids my age at the time, that if you tried to do it in other ways, you might find yourself in actual trouble. So there was that. So it was like Bill Sylvie says, it's I don't know if you know Bill Sylvie, Dungeon Delver. He said, it's Black Sabbath, it's a can of beer, it's a cigarette, it's that's 1E, where 2E is like a Paul Abdul song. You know what I mean? It's so, it's like the Dudley Do-Right version. And okay, yeah, so that's what Bill always says. And I don't know anything about fourth, or I looked at an SRD for fifth for like 5 minutes. I was like, nah, just wanted to see. So I don't really know anything more about it than that. Um, that was it. It was 1E when I played with my hardcore buddies. And for my buddies, like I said, I had a couple of neighbor kids who, I don't want to put them down, but they weren't there for the real hard, like, you know, the complex rules weren't their thing. So that's when we would reach over and we'd get Beck Me, and then we'd actually get a couple more people and they would play, and we'd do Beck Me and use the basic D&D modules. So that was the beer and pretzels version, and then there was the Saturday night playing with Ryan and some of these other guys. The guy that was my babysitter, where we'd be drinking Pabst and smoking and doing all that kind of stuff with it. Well, let me tell you, here's the thing. Right. That I had to go through with wargaming. It was the same deal. I liked Bruce Rhea Taylor in the late 80s. I liked War Games research group stuff. But when it was like, if I handed that to damn near anybody else, no way, I'm not, that's ridiculous. Because they were super detailed. All these British guys making this stuff in the late 70s, early 80s was super. Everybody was we're trying to get as realistic as possible. Realism, simultaneity that was where everybody was going for, as opposed to almost the opposite now. And so I kept having to turn the dial down before anybody would step up to the table. And even then they're like, I'm not so sure. They kept wanting to go over to Axis and Allies. And I liked Axis and Allies, but Axis and Allies was a beer and pretzels game. To me, there was serious fun. What some people call complexity, I call serious fun. I wanted that war room vibe where you were really in a tense depth, lots of detail, trying to emulate being your real world equivalent as much as possible without bringing blood and gore to the table. And then there's, hey, we just want to F around, crack some beers, talk stupid, and roll some dice. Axis and Allies. There you go. So, but it was harder to get them. So we finally found a middle ground in a guy that was local called Gary Bloom, and he made some middle of the road stuff. And that's where I kind of get my ideas for gaming, is based off of Gary's stuff, because he was of that way. It's true. Well, I was just before my I'm not bitter much, but before my co-host flew off on me, we were talking exactly about that, is how to get people involved. And that's all right. See, I had to juice it up. Like when I would go to a convention and they were playing Axis and Allies, it was never good. For me, I was like, nah, I don't want to play stock, because I played stock. I played it vanilla a ton of times, enough so that it actually started to play out and be the same game. So we used to play it every Wednesday. Every Wednesday after this guy got home from work, we'd play one game in the evening. So we got Max's Rules, which Max's Rules was like 1985, 84. And they do what the new stuff does. It brought in artillery pieces and destroyers, um, all that kind of stuff with and more fleshed out paratrooper rules or something like that. So now you can buy that whole thing and they call it the deluxe or whatever. The 50th anniversary deluxe set has all that stuff in it. But we had to juice it up a little bit. But that's okay. Yeah, I tried to get people to play Harpoon. I could never get anybody to play that. I ended up playing it with myself until I found somebody at Gen Con who would come over and play it with me. Most people looked at that and their heads just started aching, staring at that one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Harpoon. That one really got people's attention. But I got to play with Larry Bond a couple of times. I met him at Gen Con. Gen Con, see, what I want to do with my Discord server and with my business here and everything is I'm trying to make the Gen Con experience happen as much as you can online. And I know that's saying a lot because if you ever got to go to Gen Con in Milwaukee back in the day, the whole point was to be with everybody. It's not the same as my thing because I started my Rumble channel originally to talk about dreaded politics. So if you go to that, I have two channels. If you go to the one, you're going to hear some out of bounds stuff. I just changed it. I changed it from. So let's see if this new link works yet, because you're not. Gary was asking too. There's a guy named Gary that was asking. So let me put the link in here. Oh yeah, my politics stuff was kind of Sam Kinison talks. I was married for a little over 10 years, and then she left, and I got stuck in an apartment alone, and I lost my job because of COVID, and I was hemorrhaging a lot of money, and I couldn't go anywhere. The car broke down. So long story short, so I spent a lot of time alone in an apartment. And the one thing I did have was an internet connection. I hate TV. I don't watch TV anymore. I stopped watching TV years ago. So all I had was the internet. And when COVID was going around, all there really was to watch was like riots and politics and stuff. And I'm already angry at life. So yeah, I got a little hardcore. So yeah, I got a little bit. So if you turn that on, you might hear some naughtiness. If you're not familiar with Harpoon was a game created by a man's name is Larry Bond. He was a naval officer. He made a training tabletop training game for naval cadets for Annapolis and for naval ROTC cadets. And Tom Clancy got a hold of him through people hooking them up when Tom was writing Hunt for October. So as a technical assistant on the book. And one of the things they did is they played this system that Larry had come up with, and Tom was he encouraged Larry to commercialize it. So not long after Red October came out, people started talking about Harpoon, and it was a naval miniatures war game. But it's real high in it's somewhat complicated. It gets into the technical details of naval navigation and sonar, pretty in depth. And I bought second edition and a bunch of miniatures. CNC, or no, it was GHQ was making the miniatures for it. Little 1/2400th pewter naval miniatures. It was really cool, but it was a lot of people found it too complicated to get through. So, and then they computerized it in about 4 or 5 years after it came out. They made a computer version. They've made 4 or 5 computer versions now. But Larry, when he was coming out with the third version of the miniatures game, he was doing talks at Gen Con and all these conventions. He's a brilliant dude. In fact, all the Tomahawk attacks on Iraq in 1991, the Tomahawk and some of the T-Lambs, he ran that. He coordinated and designed that portion of the bombardment of Hussein in 91, based on the Kitty Hawk. That's what he was sitting on the USS Kitty Hawk out in the Gulf, and he worked that all up for him. So, guys, sharper than a tack, and so promoting this thing, he went to Gen Con, and if you signed up fast enough, he picked the first so many people, and you got to play a game with him, and then he would sit down and show you all the new things he was doing with number 3 and all that stuff. And I was lucky enough to get my name in fast enough to get picked. I lasted all of 10 minutes in that scenario, but it was still fun. So yeah, that's Harpoon. It's real great. It was a great miniatures game, but it's probably something that you could never sell anybody to play these days. But and I learned it. I've learned that most people aren't into, the kind of, I like to play things that were just a notch below what the professionals were doing at the academies. Funny thing is, when I joined the military, they were playing the same. They had a miniatures game. They busted out a miniatures game, and I expected that it was going to be all computerized and all that. And we had simulators and all that, but we were doing tabletop exercises, and they busted out what was called Dun Kempf. But the only difference between Dun Kempf and the games that I was playing or wanting to play, mostly back, I played by myself because they were complicated, was that they changed a couple of the technical details of the equipment to be more accurate, stuff like that. But generally, it was just Challenger 2 rules. And but I know people aren't into that sort of thing anymore because they were fairly complicated. And so the Armageddon's Edge that I'm making is meant to be a little more light and somewhat geopolitical, as opposed to being real deep in the weeds with platoon level or something like that. That's the one I'm coming up with for modern wargaming. And it's got a version where you can play as like the leaders of nations and stuff like that. That's one version of it that you can do. It's it was patterned after something another one of my uncles was telling me about, that I later read more about than he told me. Was called an exercise called Proud Prophet that was run in Virginia in the early 80s for the Cold War. So I took what I learned from him and what I read about it and just kind of tried to emulate that as a war game. So I am big into Cold War. I got a couple of Twilight 2000 RPGs too. I got a lot of games I'm looking for people to play. So if you're looking to play games on Discord or whatever, let me know. I got all sorts of that stuff. And I can never find enough people to play them. I got 3 things for Twilight 2000 or something like Twilight 2000. It doesn't have to be Twilight 2000, but that kind of post-apocalyptic 1980s nuke type of thing. I got a Gamma World one, and and wargaming. I can do plenty of the Panzer. Yeah, yeah. There's a I've it's true. Google and all that made everybody just kind of have a short attention span, and that's my idea is this. When we played in the military, we played Kriegspiel. We had instructors, and they ran the engagement. We played, like I said, we played the Challenger, and some guys played different ones. In fact, there's an article. If you go to Armor Magazine or Fort Benning's website, they have back issues of Armor. And in the January, February issue of 1993, you can download it as a PDF and you can read it. And in there's an article about table exercises. And the guy, Sergeant Major, he's got an odd name, like Alaskan Zonka or something like that. It's a pretty weird name, started with a U. Anyway, he wrote this thing, and he mentioned Gary Bloom, the guy I talked about earlier, as one of his sets. He says, these are the different sets you can play if you want to train your people using tabletop. And he explains how to make terrain sets and all that. It's wargaming. So, and we did that sort of stuff, but we had a judge. And I think as far as the attention span thing goes, that a judge and having a little bit of bells and whistles going off electronically through VTT keeps the thing interesting. The other thing is simultaneity was a big deal in the late 70s and early 80s. And then it got kind of pushed away as being part of the whole complexity problem. But I bring it back because simultaneity keeps everybody at the board. I used to play a game called Europa, and you played that game with, if you weren't playing with at least 15 people, you weren't playing the game. It was huge. So it was a giant monster war game, and the turns took between an hour and a half and 2 hours. I would leave the building and go have lunch and come back between turns. And that's ridiculous. But if you set it up so that something's happening on both sides all the time, so that they have a reason to stay committed and look at it, and it's interesting, you can keep people going. And the best way to do that is with the judge. Yeah, Europa's probably nothing anybody wants to play, but if you just want to see something wild, just look it up. GDW Europa. And it's divisional level counter and hex war game that covers not only the Second World War European theater, but the entire Mediterranean and North African theaters as well, and the East. The map for this thing, it came in sections and modules you bought, but if you had the whole set, the map was like the size of a queen size bed. It was ridiculous. And it had thousands of pieces all together. And I used to play that at Gen Con, and I wouldn't play every minute of Gen Con, but I'd stop in and play a couple of turns. And there'd be people walking by that would just be looking at it going, wow, look at the size of this thing. What a spectacle to see. And of course, everybody's remark was, you'd never finish that game. And we have finished it, but it takes a long time. Yeah, they made two versions. Most of the modules had a early 70s version, and then they revamped them along the way in the 80s and the 90s. And then they ran into problems financially, and the original designers started squabbling amongst themselves and suing each other, and that was the end of that. But the people at Gen Con had a full set, and they were fairly local to me, so I met them at Gen Con, and they invited me to come and play at their base of operations, which was a guy's basement, and his basement was completely dedicated to playing this game. He had several tables, and we would play. And the turns took so long, we actually played World in Flames. So you'd go make your turn on Europa, and then you'd go play a couple of turns of World in Flames while the other team made their moves because it took so long. Okay, nice talking to you. See, let's get this going. Um, do. What happened to this guy? He was going to see. All righty. Let's see, where else should we go here? Boy, I got a lot of stuff open. If anybody's still out there, feel free to speak on up. I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna leave this open. It's kind of been a bum day, and I don't know, want to hang out and chat and stuff like that. But I gotta go 10-100. I'll be right back. Hey, sorry about that, but I just had to go. Um, so just trying to pick some people up, maybe get them interested. It's amazing how much of this stuff I do for so little in the way of reply. I know everybody's got to start somewhere, but it's starting to get a little ridiculous. I don't know, what's going on that's being done wrong here, where I can only get 2 people to look. But geez, come on now. Hmm. What a drag. What happened here? Oh, yeah, it didn't really work well, but we'll figure it out. So, anyway, I don't know. Well,